All right. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Current Review podcast. Today, I have on Sebastian Blanco, and he is the editor-in-chief of the SAE Automotive Engineering magazine. And I think he is a great guest to have on because he has been in the automotive industry and covering it for a long time with the transition to electric vehicles. And I'm sure there's so much interesting stuff to discuss. But before we begin, I want to ask you some questions about your history in the automotive industry, especially just covering EVs. So you started covering EVs for a while at Autoblog Green, is that correct?
Yeah, hey Andrew, good to talk to you. Yeah, that was my first entry into the automotive industry. Yep, that was back in 2006. I believe Autoblog started in 2005. It was relatively new when I started there, and I was the first editor of Autoblog Green. They had decided someone like we should start this site, and based on I guess my application and the other people who applied, they were like, why don't you start it up? And so we were in those days we were all learning as we were going. Blogging was very different than it is today, but it was also a heck of a lot of fun.
Wow. So 2006, that was before a lot of the mainstream EVs started hitting the market. I'm pretty sure around then, some of the only electrified vehicles were just like the Toyota Prius, Honda Insight. The EV industry was far different than it is now. So could you kind of walk me through your just following this industry? Because
Well,
Tesla Roadster came out before or right after you were working there.
yeah, I mean Tesla started 2003 or 2002 as kind of a secret project. But 2006 was the unveiling of the Tesla Roadster. But let's back up a little bit before we get into that and go to an important point. Like you're talking about the EV industry being very different, and you'll note in the name Autoblog Green, like we weren't just covering EVs. Back then, like you said, the Insight, the Prius, like hybrids were a big thing, plug-in hybrids. People who would do conversions, either full EV or to make your Prius a plug-in hybrid. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening out in California, and I remember, what was his name? His first name was Kim, and I can't remember his last name. But this guy at Pat's Garage who still does stuff. There's a lot of these people who were Gadget, who's in the Chris Payne movie, who killed the electric car. Because these people working on these projects, just doing it because they were excited about it. And some of that excitement is what led to the initial sort of EV, boom that happened. But yeah, when we first started, it was not just like, when is GM going all EV, and in how many years? It was a very, very different universe.
For sure. So do you think your interest in electric cars started before Autoblog Green, or was it more during?
It was both. One of the reasons that I had that I applied to be editor there, to work there, was because I just cared about cleaner transportation as a whole. And I was living in Athens, Georgia at the time, and I just written a story for the local magazine, one of the local magazines, about people who were making biofuels locally. My roommate at the time, he was interested in working on getting biodiesel going to basically in the backyard. We'll go get some waste grease and we'll go get some what else? He needed some sort of actual fuel, methanol or something from the racetrack or something. Then we can make biodiesel. It'll be great. And there were also people around who had permission to turn basically liquor into ethanol. They could make their own ethanol in a still, and that no one was doing that. I mean, that's a step way beyond making your own biodiesel. But this is the universe of green cars back in 2006, where you could get a grease kit, you could get your Prius converted to a plug-in hybrid, and then the Tesla Roadster comes along, and of course we can look back on it now and say, duh, but it really did change what people even considered. Whatever, everybody knows this. Who follows the EV industry knows the importance of that car in the overall scheme of things. But watching it at the time, you could just feel the shift of, oh, now other people are paying attention to what these they weren't really underground. It just nobody was paying attention to them. They were underground by default.
For
They weren't
sure. So when you mentioned these shifts, what were some of the key points that you noticed where you started thinking yeah, more people are catching on to this?
I mean, it depends on at what scale. Like you obviously, going from those early days where you would know a lot of the people in the electric vehicle space. I mean, there's people who I met back then who are still in it, but we feel like that was a different time. And there were people who were doing it even longer than me. I'm not trying to pretend I was there at the beginning by any means, GM's always busting out its electro van from the 60s, and this is a long, whatever, we go a long time project for the resurgence of the EV. But as far as the transition, the first Leaf coming out, alongside the Volt, which is a different story, that was an important point, even though it was plagued with problems of different kinds. Some parts of it were absolutely great. Some parts of it were controversial. That was an important time. I feel like something else was happening in an important way as BMW and Audi were trying to kind of outdo each other there in the like 2010s or early like 2012 to 2015, 2016-ish, somewhere around there, all the different e-tron models and everything. And then that led to, I think, where we are today with more of the Polestars and the Lucids, like targeting that. Obviously Tesla is the, the behemoth in that field. But I think part of what Mercedes or Audi and BMW were doing back then was getting an audience more ready for that it can be other ones other than Tesla. But yeah, those are some of the ones that stood out from the, going back a little ways. If we're going to speak more currently, the electric trucks that are coming out, that's another shift. But I'm sure, we don't need to get all these topics tonight.
Yeah, for sure. And I think especially with some of the early EVs like the BMWs and stuff, I think you touch on a really good point when they really were kind of important in acclimating customers to electric cars. Cause like obviously the i3 is not a volume seller. It's not something groundbreaking either, but it is a pretty decent electric car and it's a lot of fun. And then when you get those out on the road and people start seeing them, then I think people are going to be more interested in getting something like an i4 now once, because the i3 has been out on the road for a while too. I mean, we can't forget that it's been out on the road since late 2013. So yeah, I think those cars were kind of good. I don't know, like litmus tests in a way to get a little more interest in the vehicles.
Well, the i3 has a specific. I remember a couple of specific moments with the i3 back in the day, and one of them happened on. There was a guy in Europe named Lewis Palmer, and he still does this today. He does this event called Wave, which I forget what it stands for, but it's basically a route that he plans every year, usually through the Alps. Through a couple of different countries. It's different every year. And you bring your own electric vehicle, and the point is not just to make the trip, but it's also to either in the towns where the group is staying or at lunch spots to have a little 2-hour festival where all the cars plug in and they bring out their literature and they set up booths and they talk to the people in town about, well, these are our electric cars. And again, he's been doing this, for, I don't know, maybe 15 years or so. So you can imagine all the different ways that people have participated. But there was one guy in the year that I was able to go who just could not tell people enough how much he loved his i3. He was this like the most ebullient like salesperson for electric vehicles, and not just like I just love seeing that. And I think that's something that has been, I don't know if it's been taken for granted or it hasn't been like emphasized enough, but just like tapping into EV drivers' love for EVs and that evangelist desire. That thing is real. I've seen it time and time and time again over the years.
Yeah, that's so true. Especially with, I guess maybe not quite to the extent today, but like if you would meet someone back like several years ago who like maybe an early Chevy Volt owner, BMW i3 owner, Tesla Model S owner, these people are just very, very enthusiastic about the products. And they probably did a way better job of selling those cars than the actual marketing teams did.
Right. And in a lot of cases, I think we can say definitively they did. Yeah.
For sure. And so kind of along this, just following this whole transition, what are some like big insights you've gained on maybe in a way for automakers to get customers into EVs? What do you think? Just what are some like insights you've gained and wisdom along the way you've discovered?
I think it's kind of cheating to take the answer that Chelsea Sexton would give you because she's been doing this way longer than me, and I just have to bow to her expertise. But one of her main answers to this question is just the butts and seats. Get people to drive it. More and more and more people are able to do that now than they ever were before. But to go along with sort of a look back in recent history, and they still do it today. But there's Drive Electric Week, right? That happens every
Hmm.
September-ish. But like, I forget how many years they've been doing it now, but the early years were very much this, like group of people who were so excited to tell everyone else this is what an EV can do, just like the people I was talking about on the wave drives over in Europe. So that's been part of this group of customers, of potential shop or salespeople, basically from the beginning. And I don't remember seeing that tapped really from an OEM side, just from the EV proponent side. I think nowadays we don't really need that as much. It certainly would help for just more sponsorship and more help for organizations or for day events like Drive Electric, just because again people just need to experience these cars. But anybody really who wants to, unless you're in some rural part of America, you're not that far from an actual test drive, so you could go do this
Hmm.
yourself. So it is much easier now than it used to be, and now the question becomes getting people excited about it. And if I could answer the question of how you do that, then I'd be working at an agency or something helping to sell these things. But for me, that's a good answer, is let people experience them, test them out, learn that they're not that crazy, they're not that different, and they have a lot of benefits.
For sure. And so we're talking about this, like getting customers excited. What do you think some of the biggest hurdles are right now with getting customers behind the wheel of an EV? Because I feel like as time goes on, like the big argument was price, but now as we can see, maybe a lot of customers aren't familiar with this, but it's like you can get some pretty good electric cars for not too much money now, like very in line with internal combustion engine vehicles. Like you can get Chevy Bolts now for about the same price as like maybe a used Chevy Cruze, and the Chevy Bolt's going to be pretty much better in every single regard. So what do you think some of the big like issues are now in 2024 for customers?
Well, I'll try to answer that in a second. First off, like I really love what you've been posting to various social media about, like where I've been tracking some of these prices. It's really useful to see. Like you're not just saying that; you're able to see these and point to listings.
Yes.
Be like,
You
yeah,
can
this
get a Model 3 for 15,000 now,
right.
which
Like
is insane.
here's the link to go buy it. Like
Yeah.
which would be giving you commission on all these. But for me, there is like it's so obvious because that's exactly what I did. Is 2 years ago, or I guess a year and a half ago now. We bought a used Chevy Bolt because even back then their prices have come down a lot since then. But I had to, due to an incident with a large North American mammal and my previous vehicle. Um, I was kind of in a hurry to get a new car, and so we had to buy at that point instead of wait a little while. But anyway, it just makes sense, to me. It's once you get to thinking about it and do the numbers and make sure it works for you, then it's really a no brainer. So as far as what they can do now, I mean, I don't know how much the politics is getting in the way. Like that really is an unnecessary hurdle.
Hmm.
There should be a way that we can be a little more reasonable about this. Like it's not like more patriotic to burn fuel, right? Like
Yeah.
that that's a hurdle that I'm really not equipped to answer, but that's a weird thing that I didn't necessarily expect. I mean, one of the articles let's come back a little bit. One of the articles, which is probably still out there somewhere, I wouldn't know where to find it now exactly, because Autoblog just went through a big, company change, and they're kind of shutting it down and doing
I've heard
different.
about that,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I don't know what's happening to the archives. I guess hope they're out there somewhere. But
Yeah.
one of the articles I did was when it came time to drive the Model X. Um, it's hard to find Tesla vehicles if you're media. So
Hmm.
through various connections, I was able to find this guy, and he said, "Yeah, you guys can come out and have it for the afternoon and borrow it." And so that was great. And then we just got to talking, and he ended up like we had a really interesting conversation. We ended up using it as a long article about how like this very conservative man who's one of the first people to get a Model X, like just loved EVs and like had all these different viewpoints, but could understand EVs. And that, so for the trend from that all those years ago to where it is now, it's a little bit unfortunate. But if we
Hmm.
just think of the market as a whole and kind of take the politics out of it, the Blazer EVs come in, like more EVs that shouldn't be crazy expensive and also relatively practical,
Hmm.
are on the way with more and more coming. Like okay, so maybe it takes a little bit longer than we thought. Like I'm not in a big, you know, big that's not a big point of worry if they push some of these goals back. I mean, I want them to be here today, but they know that the customers are going to be there for these cars. They're going to still make them. Um, I just I don't know. Even with all the recent announcements where they're taking a step back, I don't see any real dramatic change away from the overall goals.
Mhm. Yeah, especially with the news recently, because I know Volvo slightly stepped back, but like some of the headlines were insane. They were like Volvo like backs out on EV movement. I forgot what outlet that was from, but
Yeah.
if you would read it and you were someone who wasn't really familiar, you'd be like, oh my gosh, Volvo is now ditching all their electric car plans. I think that was actually the headline of it.
Mhm.
But it's like when you read into it, it's like, okay, they still were aiming for 90 to 100% of their vehicles in 2030 being either EVs or plug-in hybrids.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it might be going a little bit slower, but I think it's still pretty clear where the industry is headed. And
Right.
I think that is kind of concerning when people are just blindly just saying, oh no, that's not the future. And I think the answer is just look right over to China and all their EV investments and how it's paid off for them. And yeah, I think for the United States to get back in there, we need to maybe encourage some more mining for minerals in a sustainable way, more manufacturing here, because it's pretty obvious where the future is headed, at least for me and for you, I would
Yeah.
assume.
It is. Yeah. So how do they keep up demand? I mean, car companies have been selling people various cars that they may or may not actually need for decades now. I think they can figure out how to sell more EVs if they really put their heart into it. I understand if you're making more money from a gas powered, $100,000 truck than you might
Mhm,
from a $60,000 EV, but if you really want to do it, they can do it.
mhm, definitely. And so when you mentioned your Chevy Bolt earlier, so you've been driving that for a year and a half. How's your ownership experience been so far?
It's been great, and I know we talked a little bit about like I don't track the metrics on it. I used to do that with my gas cars when I filled up, like I'd write down how much I put in the tank, but it just the EV lifestyle just makes it too easy. Like
Mhm,
we're lucky enough to have a garage and charger in there, so you come home, you're good to go every morning. Like it's I don't even think about it. So any questions you might have about like kilowatts per mile or all that miles per kilowatt hour, like that's I just can't answer it because we've just been using it and it's been great.
mhm. Yeah, the Chevy Bolt, because I actually had one for about a month this summer. So during my internship, we had to do a long-term rental, and so my three roommates and I we decided to split one at Hertz, and we did the mystery EV, and it turned out to be a Chevy Bolt. And so we were driving. I put on like 1,500 miles on that car, like in around a month. And like, I gotta say, for like the price range of that vehicle, it is pretty much one of the best options out there. And especially like with used values now, it's like,
Mhm.
I think if someone's looking for a reliable commuter car, and then you can even go on some shorter road trips. I mean, we did some DC fast charging. It's not super fast, but
Right.
so doable. Like if you just time it with your lunch or whatever. But
Yep.
yeah, the Chevy Bolt is really good option.
As a starter EV, absolutely. We're a two-car family, so it's not the only thing we rely on. But I'm going to Detroit next week, Detroit area for a work thing, and I can get there no problem. Somewhere I'll have to charge on the way back, but I know I'll make it. I've done it enough times that I know where the chargers are, and like you said, just plan reliably. But yeah, it's a car like that makes a lot of sense. And if it doesn't make sense, then the good news is you don't have to get it. There's plenty of other things that do make sense in the EV space now. But that's one of my go tos that I recommend. Although speaking of recommendations for EVs, this last weekend I was hanging out with a friend, and she's moving and wants to sell her Tesla. She has
Ooh,
a Model 3, I think, and was wondering
okay.
what to get next. And no, maybe she has Model S. Either way, it's a couple years old. She's ready for a new thing, and I hope I talked her into the Ionic 5N because she
That
wants
would be
a little
sick.
bit of a little bit of sporty thing. She's okay with that price range. And I told her how much I love the five itself. I haven't been able to drive
Yes.
the N yet, but everything I've heard about it makes it sound wonderful. So
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think because I spent a little bit of time in the Ioniq 5, and then I think I put on like 3,500 miles in an EV6 as well.
Mhm.
And like the EV6 and like just the eGMP cars that Hyundai and Kia makes are some of the best in the industry. Like there's like a few little thing like nitpicks here and there, but like overall, these cars are really, really good. And just with the charge rates on them, like I remember with the Ioniq, or sorry, the Kia EV6, we were doing a road trip down like Southern California, and we plugged in at about 22%, and then it took 16 minutes to go to 80%, which
Wow.
is just like it's so fast that like you can literally go inside to like if there's like a restaurant there or something, and then order your coffee, and by the time you're out, the car is pretty much ready to go. And
Yeah.
it's just like that. The Kia and Hyundai lineup are truly incredible.
Yeah, that is not the Chevy Bolt experience, but
Yeah.
these are different cars, different prices. It makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, those are easy to recommend.
For sure. And I think because that's the other thing too, like I like about the those vehicles is that they're more normal. Because like especially for like someone who um maybe is not so much on the techie side and then gets in a Tesla, and it's like sometimes it is nice to have the buttons and then everything else. And like you get in a Kia and it feels more like a normal car, whereas like you get in a Tesla and it's like, okay, this is completely different. But yeah, those that is a very good platform they got.
Yeah, yeah.
So, when you mention your two-car garage, if there is any other EV you have on the radar in the future, are there any you're particularly looking at?
Um, well, if I were to like trade up the Bolt just to for a newer car, I would probably replace it with a five Ioniq 5. I think for
Okay.
the other car, we live in a more rural part of Michigan, and there's parts out here that are pretty far. So something like a Rav4 Prime might
Hmm.
be the second option there, where we're still getting some benefits of the electric drive, but when it's time to go to the UP or something, until the infrastructure gets built out more, plug-in hybrids just are a reality for I think for a lot of people. And again, we get most of the EV benefits most of the time. It just makes it easier to go across the bridge or something.
Yeah, no, the plug-in hybrids, because there's a big debate in the EV community about plug-in hybrids. I'm kind of in the bandwagon that I think they work for a lot of people, and especially if you have good charging habits. I mean, you can basically drive it as an EV for the majority of the time. Do you have any strong opinions on plug-in hybrids?
I feel that totally agree with you, and it goes back even to this is I don't know 15 whatever years ago when someone was first explaining, or I was first kind of thinking about what it is that the EV world is doing to the world of cars itself. And back then, of course, it's a very small pie. There's also very few people who are interested in that pie in the first place. So kind of everybody who wanted some was able to get some. And then as the pie grows, well, now there's more people because now there's different kinds of EVs. And we all back then we always counted the Volt as part of sort of the EV community, even though it had the gas, range extender, but it was sort of an honorary EV member because everybody's excited about cars that plug in. And so I think as part the community can see it as they've evolved side by side ever since then. And as this pie is getting bigger, there's different EVs that do different things, and some of those might be plug-in hybrids. Um,
Hmm.
I will take the benefit of if they pencil out. We have to do the life cycle footprint analysis and make sure everybody's on the up and up with the numbers. But if it all pencils out, that it still gives you overall lower CO2 because you're using it as as an EV most of the time, and then sometimes we burn some fuel. If we're not doing it as much as we are today, it doesn't become as big of a deal
Hmm.
for the environment. Like let's be clear. Um, and whatever, we don't need to get into all that side of it. But I know I'm very much in favor of plug-in hybrids being there for the people for whom a pure EV or maybe a pure EV household isn't into. I will say, it's like so many stories that I've heard over the years. If you have two cars and replace one of them with an EV, the other car just sits there most of the time. That is
Hmm.
100% true. Is yeah the gas car we still have is just it's a hybrid, but it just does not see as much action as it used to.
For sure, yeah. Well, especially just like how much more fun EVs are to drive, how much more affordable they are to run. It's like, why would you drive the other vehicle?
Right. So
Yeah, definitely. And so we mentioned Toyota real quick, and I think one topic I kind of wanted to touch on is like, what is your like overall thoughts on like Toyota's EV strategy, just focusing on hybrids? Because I think like at least for the time being, it seems to be working out well. Like, but thinking more out in the future, do you have any takes on that?
I mean, nothing that I feel like hasn't been mentioned or somewhere before. But Toyota's never been the leader in EVs. They were one of the leaders in hybrids. Everybody knows this. So it's not in any way a surprise to see it. Um, I I wondered for years why it is that they're this hesitant towards jumping in with both feet, even if that meant, you could still do something with hybrids, you could still do something with your hydrogen projects, you could still do something with plug-in hybrids, but why not, also go gung ho like Hyundai's doing, right? Hyundai's not
Hmm.
selling the Palisade, like
Hmm.
they're doing other things too. They're also making really good EVs,
Yeah.
and why, there's no reason Toyota couldn't have done that. You know,
Hmm.
that this whole like Lexus driven by Lexus spirit that they talk about for those vehicles. They could have made, just some rocker of an EV racer or something. You know,
Hmm.
they could have done it. We all know that. Um, so because they haven't, saying now that, or that they're sticking with this, we'll keep the hybrids and we'll add some more plug-in hybrids to our lineup kind of plan is not surprising at all.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think especially when you compare it to like Hyundai, it's just you look at their just super diverse portfolio and how you have literally like pretty much anything you can think of. You can get the Genesis G80 electrified, which is a nice big electric sedan. You can get something as crazy as a, I don't know, like a Genesis G70 with like a twin turbo V6. Like they just have so many different products. The Hyundai Nexo, not really sure why you would buy that just because hydrogen infrastructure is not too great, but you have it as an option.
Right.
And I think that's the cool thing about like Hyundai is you see them, they just have this wide portfolio with a bunch of really good products where Toyota does have really good products, but it is very limited because they have EVs or the BZ4X, which
Mhm.
after doing a road trip in the Solterra, which is on the same platform, it was kind of a nightmare.
Yeah.
And you have like the Toyota Mirai, but it's hydrogen, so it's going to be hard to get fuel. But yeah, I think when you look at those two Asian automakers, you kind of see which one's in the lead in terms of technology.
Hmm. It
And
seems to me for sure. Yeah.
so I guess on that note, where do you think the market is just headed in the future? Like, where do you see EVs and various other forms of propulsion kind of working their way into the market, maybe 10, 20 years out?
I mean, I'm terrible at these kind of future predictions, but I can say with certainty, like at SAE, we talk to a lot of engineers, a lot of suppliers who are looking as far in the future as they can, because it takes so long for new products to be developed, be turned into an order for a vehicle, and then come to market. So they got to be thinking far ahead. All of these topics when it comes to electrification, they're not the only thing they're looking at. Safety, ADAS, AVs, obviously, all that stuff's huge too. But I mean, I get there's so many people out there working on so many facets of the electrification of the auto industry that why would this not keep going in this direction? I mean, yes, some people might want there to be more hydrogen vehicles, but you just don't see that level of push from that many people.
Or enthusiasm?
Or you're right, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Both engineering excitement and just enthusiasm from the community. So because there's enough realization that we can't continue on the way that we have been, something has to change. And if that looks like more plug-in hybrids, fine. There's still electrification benefits. EVs will keep getting better. And like you said, we're already at a point where there's screaming good deals out there for shoppers if they want to do this. Um, more experience, more people, more models, more people testing them out. I think the change happens, um, whether the industry wants it or not, as long as we keep moving somewhat into an EV direction. Like if they just stop making them, of course they have that power. But why would they do that? Like there's enough people out there that want these. And I still think it'll keep going up, even if there are hiccups like there are right now. I don't see a little bit of a downward trend as taking away from the overall upward trend when we look back at it in the time frame that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Well, and especially like we see, like there's headlines about the rate of growth, and like sure, the rate of growth is still might be slower than how it was, but it's still a positive growth. We're still seeing more EVs getting on the road than there were last year.
Right. That pie that I was talking about earlier just keeps on getting bigger and bigger because there's more and more types of EVs for more and more types of people, more used EVs coming to the market that are, in pretty good shape for the most part, because we both know everybody listening, I'm sure knows, unless something terrible happens, there's not that much wear and tear on an EV in general, especially if you replace the tires. And then, so there's good deals out there to be had. And then sooner or later, they just keep on replacing the gas cars that are out there. History's a long thing, right? And who knows how long this one's going to take when we finally look back at it. I've been doing it almost 20 years. That I'm able to look at the long game at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a good note to end on. And so thank you very much, Sebastian, for joining the podcast. I think we had a pretty insightful conversation.
Andrew, this was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.